So, welcome everyone to episode 2. That's what we've called it. I was trying to come up with a name for the episode. I was like, no, we're just going to call it episode 2 because I'm lazy that way. Episode 2 of Introduction to Homeopathy. And I have the wonderful Ann Callaghan with us again today to continue the lessons of why homeopathy is not the same as herbalism, number one, and how we use homeopathy and all. I think we're going to be talking about a few of the different remedies today. Are we not?
Yeah.
Awesome. Some of our favorites. Hello, Anne, my love. How are you doing?
Afternoon. I'm all right. Just about. I feel really tired today, but
Weird energy today. We had to go get groceries, and the energy was like, "Oh, get me home, get me home, get me home. I can't be out here with all these people. I can't. Not going to survive." So.
Okay, so what I want to do in this episode is to do a quick review of the principles. And if anybody is looking at this who hasn't watched number 1, you really should watch number 1. But in this episode, I just want to focus on really easy to use first aid homeopathy, which anybody can use, whether or not you go further into learning more about how, the different remedies. Everybody should have these in their home kit because they're just amazing. So I will share screen if you let me, Miss
Danny. A second, my love. I'm going to make you co-host so that you can then do that. There you go. You should be okay. You should be able to share screen now.
Sure.
There we go.
And I can't see the chat when I'm using this particular program, so
I will monitor
keep an eye on
questions.
Okay, away we go, hopefully. So a review of the principles, and you have to keep looking at this to drill it into your head, because we have, we've been reared in a very different world, and it's hard not to, look at homeopathy like we do with allopathic medicine. So you really have to get your head around, like cures like. We're looking for a remedy that's a match for a person's symptoms. So it's a match for the person, this individualized. So it's very hard for us to say, to give specifics for a lot of illnesses, because we need to look at the person and find a match for their particular response. And we give that remedy in a minimum dose. Very often this dose is so small it doesn't even have molecules of the original substance in it. So this is peculiar to homeopathy. Other systems of medicine have the like cures like aspect, but the minimum dose, diluting and succussing a substance way beyond the point where it has a molecule, is unique to homeopathy. And then the third principle is the direction of cure. And this allows us to evaluate whether or not what we're doing is working. If somebody is healing from the inside out and from the top down and from a more important organ to a less important organ, then we know that what's happening is good. If it's going in the other direction, from a less important organ to a more important organ, we know it's bad. Now, if orthodox medicine were to apply direction of cure, they would see that a lot of what they do is actually making people sicker. But they don't use this, unfortunately. Now, I needed to say something about dosage and repetition, because that's another thing that stymies people every now and again. So this chart here is taken from Miranda Castro's book, which we'll look at in other episodes, I suppose you could say. And she says, in very serious situations, you can give the 6C, 12C, 30C, 200C. In other words, whatever you've got. You have it, Danny. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's very easy to use. Yes. Wonderful home remedy finder. So yeah, what she's saying here essentially is if it's a very serious situation and you only have a 6C, then give it. Don't hold back just because you don't have a higher dose. So for a situation where someone is in great pain or the injury is serious, you can give a dose every 5 to 30 minutes. So I'll talk a bit about response in a minute, and when you stop. Once somebody is better, do you remember what we said before, that one way of looking at a homeopathic remedy is it's like a drain rod. It's just activating your own immune response. And when your immune response is working, you don't need to do anything. You just wait and watch what the body is doing, right? So it's not like when you get a course of antibiotics and you have to take X number for 10 days or whatever. With the homeopathic remedy, all you're doing is you're unblocking the person's own healing energy. And once that energy is flowing, it'll do its job. And we sit back and watch and see what happens. When you see it sort of blocking up again, you give another dose. So then she says, in a serious situation like flu or food poisoning, you give, again, 6, 12, 30, 200, whatever you've got to hand. But the dose is slower. 1 dose every 1 to 2 hours, because you need to stand back and watch the response. It takes a little bit longer for the body to respond in flu or situations like that. And then for less serious, again, 6, 12 or 30C, cough, teething, vomiting, 1 dose every 4 to 8 hours. This will become clearer as we go along. In the beginning, it's a little bit hard to take on board, but the main thing to remember is that you give 1 pill and that should start the unblocking process. If nothing has happened in 3 doses, then it's probably not the right remedy. You know, if you go poke, poke, poke at the drain, nothing happens, then you have to think again.
And I think that's one of the really important things that, again, is different from the way people view allopathic medicine, right? Yeah. It's like, no, you just keep taking this antibiotic over and over and over again, regardless of whether it's clearing the symptoms or not. It's an important differentiation to make.
It is very important, because sometimes people think, if I keep taking it, it'll work eventually. But that's not the way it is with homeopathy. What we're doing is just keep thinking about unblocking the drain. If you've poked it a few times and nothing's happening, you haven't got the right tool. You need to get something else. So today we're going to talk about accident and injury remedies. And the reason for that is they're very easy to use. Yeah, everyone should have one of these in their car and in their home.
Everyone. And I will, for everyone in the States, here in the UK, you can just go to helios.co.uk. In the States, Mary, who designed these kits, Mary Aspinwall, has her own website. So I will make sure, with the article that will go with this recording, I will make sure that the link to Mary Aspinwall's site is there, so you can order these in the States, because everyone should have one of these. They're phenomenal.
So the reason why accident and injury remedies are easy to prescribe is because it's something that happens to you from the outside. The prior reasons, could be something else, but what happens, the trauma that happens to the body, happens from the outside, and most bodies will react in the same way. So we can be quite prescriptive about these remedies. We can say, definitely take this or take that or take the other. So I hope you get that. It's because it's not a sickness, a disease that comes from the inside. It's something that comes boom from the outside. And it's a great way to learn about homeopathy. You can really start to get confident about when to take a remedy and how to take a remedy and how often to repeat if you start out with these first aid remedies. I'm going to cover about 8 of them today, and that's plenty. If you get used to using those 8, then that's a great jumping off point.
And I think that's I love that point, Ann, because I hadn't put 2 and 2 together. I actually think of it in that way, that external accident that happens. And that's why we can say you've fallen down, banged your head, taken arnica. Because it is something external. It's not the person. It is an accident that's happened to them.
Yeah.
I like that point.
However, of course, in constitutional prescribing, if someone is always having accidents, you look at a prior, what's going on behind. Somebody rang me yesterday who'd had an anaphylactic reaction to a bee sting, and it turned out that she'd had a very nasty trauma with her ex the day before. So you could say there might have been something off about her frequency that caused that to happen. But we're not going into that constitutional look just now. We're just going to look at the trauma of the accident. Okay, I can see there's 4 comments there, but I don't think I need to do anything.
Nope.
Okay, so we'll start out with the one that everybody should have. Absolutely everybody. I've taken to watching, what was I watching? It's on BBC, on Channel 4, one of these heli-doc things where they go out, and they do these trauma calls and serious like accidents. And I keep thinking, God, if they only had first aid remedies, they could, they could really do so much good. So Arnica montana is that lovely plant up there. Montana gives you a clue as to, where it likes to grow in the mountains. Sheep and goats will eat it quite often if they fall and trip and hurt themselves. It's an injury remedy. It's the first remedy to think of in any accident or injury situation. And if you don't give anything else or you don't know anything else, you can't do any damage with arnica. It's absolutely incredible. There was an old English homeopath actually who said she could run a practice on arnica. You practically could. Well, she was a GP, so they were the kind of things that she saw. So injury predominantly to soft tissue. The parts feel bruised, sore, and people often say they can't walk properly. They're lame. Another thing that somebody will say that they've never been well. If somebody says, I've never been well since I had that, not bang on the head because that's something else. I've never been well since I had that injury, that fall or that sprain or whatever. Arnica can often help that, bring you back into balance again. One of the things an arnica person will say to you is, I'm okay, leave me alone. Now, this is a very sensible response from the body because if you're injured, there's a period of time where you need to figure out, do an internal kind of like, what's happened to me? Am I okay? What parts are damaged and what parts aren't? So they'll often say that, don't touch me, leave me alone, I'm okay. And that's just that they're doing this internal review of what's gone on. Generally better for lying down, generally worse for being touched. You can use it for bruises, breaks, strains. Post-operatively, it's brilliant. For jet lag. In jet lag, our etheric bodies are sort of lag behind us because we're moving at an unnatural speed for the body, for the physical body. And arnica brings all of these etheric bodies back together again. Great remedy to use during childbirth and after dental work, after extractions, for instance. I actually broke a bone in my foot jumping off an ambulance. And I'd been doing first aid and the ambulance had arrived. I was on the ambulance and I was sending them off to hospital with the arnica, had it in my hand, jumped off the ambulance and I heard the crack. And I just popped some arnica in my mouth immediately, hobbled in, sat down, put the foot up. And I've broken loads of bones in my, from my horsey sort of background. So I know very well what it feels like to break a bone. And prior to homeopathy, most of my breaks had been before homeopathy. And so I know that feeling that you very often, you go into shock depending on how bad the break is and so on. None of that happened when I took the arnica immediately. None of that happened. I was aware that I was injured and I was aware that I couldn't walk on my foot. But it hardly swelled at all. And when I got to the hospital and they had a look at the break, they said, "Oh, we're going to bandage you up because that's going to swell, and we come back and have a cast like 3 days from now because we don't want to cast it while it's swollen." And I came and it didn't swell at all. I went back and they were absolutely amazed at how well it was doing. So it's an extraordinary remedy. If you have it straight away, you know, it really helps to speed up the healing. The body causes, you know, it splints itself in a way by causing inflammation. So there's a reason why the body does that. But when it's over-inflamed, it does slow up the healing process. And another thing, it's very related. Arnica is very related to muscle injury, soft tissue, which is muscle, and the heart is a muscle. So it's also something, you know, it's a remedy that you can give if you've nothing else as a first aider. And you know, first aid is just about keeping someone alive until they get other help. It's a first aid. Arnica is a brilliant thing to give. My mum had a stroke and was paralyzed down one whole side of her body. And I'd been away, came back, got to the airport and was taken directly to the hospital and started her on Arnica, and the paralysis reversed. And they couldn't believe it. They could not believe it. They didn't think it would happen. So,
I mean, Arnica is if there's one thing I have with me at all times, it is Arnica.
Yeah.
And I've watched where someone, like, especially little ones, like when you talk, and that's one of the touchy situations when we talk about allopathic Western medicine, is when you have a little one who's like a year old and they hurt themselves. Do you want to be giving these medications? And yet I've seen a friend of ours, her son fell and he had like instantaneously goose egg. It was like that high off his little forehead, and gave him an Arnica. 15 minutes later, gave him another Arnica. 15 minutes later, gave him another Arnica. By the time they left to go home, it was red. It was going to obviously bruise a bit, but all that swelling was gone. And that is the thing about Arnica, I find, is that it's the one remedy that you see. You can see the difference when especially if it's you're a mom and you've got kids, so you know what the bumps and bruises and the traumas, physical traumas are. And when you give them Arnica, you can literally see how fast it works.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. So yeah, the first thing to have and the first thing to give in any first aid situation. Now, the next one, which is incredibly useful, is Aconitum napellus. Aconite for short. And it's the #1 remedy for shock. Now, Orthodox medicine has nothing, absolutely nothing to deal with shock. And shock can be a killer. There she goes. Yeah. So in the aconite state, the person is full of fear and anxiety. They often think they're going to die. They're restless. And sometimes they say, it's like I'm in a dream. You know, they're not grounded. They're dazed, confused. And then they can go on into the physical, like nausea and vomiting, tachycardia, which is a fast heartbeat, numbness and tingling, and they can feel very cold. The typical symptoms of shock. Now, shock will usually accompany an accident. The worse the injury, the more likely you are to go into shock. Even observing, somebody can be shocked just watching an accident. You can be shocked, you can be shocked getting bad news. I remember being called out to a household where a young boy had been killed. He'd been walking on the road and a bus ran him over. And when I went to the house, several of the kids were vomiting. They were vomiting because they were so shocked. And aconite was the remedy for them. So yeah, when you get bad news, it doesn't have to be a physical injury, but it can be a psychic injury, if you like. Getting, sudden bad news or
That's a good way of putting it, and that's a really good way of putting it because it's still an injury.
Yeah. It's something sudden, and it's something that boom comes from the outside. Aconite, of course, is used for many other things, but we won't go into that right now because we're just looking at the first aid uses at the moment. So aconite and arnica, two things you should always have in your bag, in your car, in your first aid, in your bug out bag or whatever. Brilliant. Because if you can stop a person going into shock is again, it's God, my English. It's a mechanism the body uses as a kind of a pause period, if you like. It's like okay, we push the pause and just reassess and see what's going on. But the problem is that very often people go into shock and they get stuck in it,
and they stay there,
and the healing doesn't move on.
Yeah.
So it's amazing remedy to have. Now, this lovely plant we all have in our gardens, Bellis perennis.
I had some sitting on my desk. I'm looking around going, no, I just put it away. I had some Bellis perennis drying on my desk.
Yeah. If you think about the daisy, the little daisy, we stomp on daisies. They're in everybody's grass. We walk on them and yet they still come up. We still make their little smiley faces. So it's for deep tissue injury. It's deeper, it's softer, very often trauma to the abdomen. If somebody gets a really bad bang in the tummy, Bellis perennis can do the work. I first of all usually start out with arnica, and if arnica doesn't work, then go for the Bellis. Bellis is brilliant for that. Recovery from operations involving uterus, liver, spleen, or gallbladder. So it's the soft cavity, organs in the soft cavity, injuries to them. So if you get a kick in the stomach, a blow in the stomach, something like that. One day, a neighbor came to me and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, my dog just ate one of your hens. I left it lying by the compost heap." And I went, "Oh, right." And I went out and I found this poor little hen, and she was just lying there. So I brought her into the kitchen. She's still alive, but only just alive. So I gave her arnica and aconite, put her in a box, left her in the kitchen overnight. And I thought, well, if she makes it through the night, great, we'll see, we'll see what happens. So yeah, she was still alive the next day, but she wasn't making progress. And this is, you think, okay, something else is needed. And I thought, right, because the little dog, he was a terrier. I got her by her, the bite marks were on her tummy. He picked her up. And so I thought, oh, Bellis perennis, yeah. So I gave her Bellis. And the next day she was standing up and eating. And she went on to continue laying eggs, which was amazing. We thought she never would. So think of it in any situation where somebody has an injury to the tummy particularly, the soft central cavity, if you like. Bellis perennis. Now, another wonderful remedy, Hypericum Perfoliatium, which is just known as Hypericum. Yeah. This is
how old my bottle is. I really should, that's how old my bottle is. You can tell how much it gets used by the color of the label.
Yeah. Oh, I think that one, you've had that one since Malta.
Yes.
Yes. So if there's a nerve injury, this is what you need to think of. Hypericum for nerves. Any injury to nerves. So the pains would normally be shooting, tearing, worse for pressure, and you can have extreme pain. So if somebody has a back injury, you give the arnica first, you have a look, and you realize that there's an injury to the back, Hypericum is the next thing to think of. And ideally in a high potency, like a 200C or even higher. Injuries to spine, fingers. We've had black jokes, or not exactly jokes, but when these people say there's nothing in homeopathy, some of the homeopaths were saying, well, you should get somebody and trap their fingers in a door and hold off, and then give them the Hypericum and see if they see what happens. Hypericum is amazing. If you trap your fingers very rich in nerves, so, and very painful. If you trap your fingers in a door, extremely painful, and Hypericum relieves that pain almost immediately. Great after dental work or even pre-dental work if you're having nerve pain. Great for surgery. Also great for puncture wounds and incised wounds. Are there any questions I need to answer at this point?
No, I have to ask everyone to hold the questions till we get to the question and answer at the end. There's been a couple of good questions, so.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. Sorry. Nerve pain, okay? And that's when you get that sharp pain. So, for example, I have bad shoulders. And it was, as much as you use remedies, they all work so well, etc. And then you have something happen. So, for example, I'd woken up one day and I had pins and needles in my hand going right up my arm. It was very obviously I had a nerve trapped in my back shoulder, and literally took the Hypericum. I took 2 over 15 minutes, and it was just gone. Just magically, like it never existed. Like it couldn't believe how far. And now it's when my shoulders go bad, that's my number one go-to. That's why they sit right here on my desk. So yeah, now we can go on.
So this brilliant plant, Calendula, officinalis calendula, for wounds. It's an amazing wound healer, absolutely amazing. So you think of calendula when there is an injury. Oh, nice. Yeah, it makes a great tincture.
How much I love calendula. Calendula is like
brilliant tincture. And Danny can, I'm sure you've talked about tinctures. There's obviously a difference between tinctures or herbalism. This is homeopathy. So any injury to the skin, particularly a lacerated cut. Now, a lacerated cut is one that you would get when, if you, for instance, you fall and graze your knee, that's a lacerated cut. The wound edges are not even, like an incision. An incision has got very clean edges that come together nicely. A lacerated cut, you might often be missing little bits of skin, and the edges don't come together very nicely necessarily. And they're prone to go bad. They often do. So a lacerated wound that is suppurating, which is a lovely homeopathic word for oozing pus. The kind actually that we used to get as kids, we used to fall on our knees a lot, and you'd get a great big scab, and under the scab would be this yellow pus. Now, don't know about you, maybe that was peculiar to our we used to do a lot of roller skating in my family and landing on our knees, and we never had knee pads in those days. No. So yeah. A thing about calendula is the pain is often excessive for the size of the wound. It's an interesting one that the pain is excessive for the size of the wound, and wounds slow to heal. This is a remedy that has been used very successfully for the treatment of diabetic ulcers, for instance. People have, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Very, very useful. You can use it, you would use it internally and topically. Brilliant. You can often bring back to life, or you can heal ulcers that have not healed for forever with calendula. Very useful for mothers, for cracked nipples from breastfeeding, and also after episiotomy. In that case, you would probably use the tincture and apply it in a pad to the wound. But you would use it internally also. It's one of the wonder remedies, really. You can treat any wound with calendula.
I will be doing a whole video on calendula alone, which is one of the reasons why I've got a bunch of the dried ones on my desk. because
Yeah, it's amazing.
it's one of my most favorite flowers, and it is
Mm,
my go-to for so many things. So many things.
Yeah. The tincture is great for people who've got ulcerative colitis or wounds internally, if you like. The tincture can be part of that treatment. And ledum, this is one that we don't know so well. Most people don't use it that often, but it's a great remedy for puncture wounds. You have it, Danny. Of course you
do. It's in my other kit though. I'm looking. My kits are messed up at the moment. None of the right remedies are in the right spots, so I can't pull that one out.
So a puncture wound, the thing that's dangerous about a puncture wound is that it has a very generally, think about a nail going into the skin, very small route of entry, but quite deep often, if it's a bad puncture wound, if you stand on a nail, for instance. Now, the problem there is that the surface might close over and still be dirty in the base. Yes. So what you need to do is if it's not a very serious one, you squeeze it to get it to bleed out. Or irrigate it with saline if you can, but make sure that the base of the wound has been cleaned. That's really important.
And I always suggest doing the hot water soak, salt water, so that you can and for example, foot. And I've had several that I've treated over the years. When you step on something, and that flexing your foot in the hot salt water, so that you are.
The water goes up and in.
You're almost kind of, yes, in a way, you're almost kind of sucking the hot, salty water into the wound to clean it out.
Yeah. So it is a remedy that we would use combined or alternated with Hypericum in cases where you might be wondering about potential for tetanus. Okay. So that would be if you're out in farm, in the country, on a farm where there's animals, and somebody gets a deep puncture wound, you can alternate Hypericum and ledum. And the reason we alternate them is you don't want to wait around to see what happens. So one or the other is going to do it. You can use it for bites and stings, animals, bee stings. You can use it for sometimes, but more particularly bites from other flying insects. The funny thing about ledum is that the parts feel cold and they're better for cold. So instead of, very often when you have an injury, the part will be red and hot. In ledum, it's cold and better for cold. And very often ledum has an affinity with the feet. Very often it's something to do with, you'll find that ledum injuries happen around the feet. And now I think this is the last one coming. Oh, no, it's not. Cantharis, Spanish fly, brilliant remedy for second-degree burns, sunburn, burns and scalds where there's feeling of rawness and smarting. And of course, better for cold applications. But again, it's a great thing to have in case somebody, you can give it for any sort of burn really, but there are other remedies for very serious burns. But it will really help with the pain. And you would be doing other first aid interventions as well. But Cantharis is a great one to think of. It's also, when we go on and do more constitutional look at it, it's a great one for UTIs, for, burning and stinging and frequent urination.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good. That's good to know.
So, but just at the moment, I want you to just think of one word for each of these. That's all. Because if you can get that in your head and start working with that, then, we can move on to another stage after. So Cantharis, burns. And then I think this is the last one, Rutagrave. And this is for injury to tendons. Another great remedy.
Oh, yes. It's another one for me that I'm never out without, because this is the thing that keeps my shoulders still working.
So, again, it's usually used after arnica because Arnica is the go-to. You just give arnica for an injury, and then you can find out exactly what's going on. So if it's obvious that the injury is to a tendon or to the periosteum, which is the outer surface of the bone, or to cartilage, then routagrav is very likely going to be needed. So bruises to shins, elbows, kneecaps. Also great is put there in cream form. Very, very useful for following on treatment. Tennis elbow as well. Sprains and strains after arnica. Eye strain. Now this is a very interesting one, because the cartilage in the eyes, the tendons in the eyes. I am very sensitive to fluorescent light, and I really hate teaching in rooms where there are fluorescent strips, but it does happen that I have to do that sometimes. And I realize that if I have routagrav and I take routagrav, my eyes don't get affected. So if you know somebody who has to be in an office with those horrible fluorescent strips and they're having trouble with their eyes, have them take routagrav and see how it goes. So it's worse for lying on the painful part. Lying on a part equals pressure, so it's really worse for pressure, and it's better for gentle movement. So when it says those symbols, by the way, worse than and better than, I'm sure they're obvious to everyone. Better for movement, that usually means gentle movement to start. There's some other remedies like bryonia that's absolutely no good for movement. It hates movement, wants to stay absolutely still. We're not going to do bryonia today, but it is one of the fracture remedies, because when you've got a fracture, one of the things you want to do is stay absolutely still. Yep. Broken ribs, that kind of thing, you don't want any movement. So what ruta is better, there's an improvement happens if you move the part a bit. Okay, so I think that's all I have down for today. So I'm just gonna, I just wonder, how does that work? Let me see. Maybe it won't go backwards for me, I'm not sure. But I just want a quick run through.
There you go.
Arnica injury. Arnica, you all have to get arnica. Absolutely have to. One of the things I wanted to talk about with arnica that might help you to understand the dosage, the repetition of the dose. When I broke my foot that time, I had the arnica in my hand, like I say. I started to feel the pain coming on. I took an arnica immediately. I took another one about 5 minutes later. That the pain started to, what happens is you just feel that the pain is lessening. And if you feel the pain, as you feel the wave of pain coming back, you take another one. So you think about the waves coming in and out. So, you know, when you take the remedy, the wave dissipates, and then you start to feel the wave coming back, take another pill. So my progression through that would have been every 5 minutes for a couple of doses, then 15 minutes, couple of doses, then 30 minutes, couple of doses. By the time I got to the hospital, I only had to take it like once every hour. Okay, so you just feel if the pain starts to come back, take another dose.
Yeah. And
like I said in the beginning, if nothing happens, if there's no improvement whatsoever after 3 doses, you're not got the right remedy. In an injury case, you will get immediate improvement when you have the right remedy. So that's something to keep in mind. Aconite for shock. All cases of shock. When somebody has a bad injury, they will almost always be shocked. Arnica sometimes takes care of it. If it's not a huge, if it's not a really serious injury, the arnica will do enough and the person won't go into shock. But if it's if you've broken a big bone, if you break a femur, for instance, you're almost, certain to go into shock.
Well, it's interesting because Quinlan, 3 months ago, my eldest daughter, slipped on the stairs. Didn't fall, didn't really injure herself. Like she twisted her ankle a bit, but not enough to even have sprained it, just enough. But the mechanism of the fall itself shocked her so badly. She got into the living room and she was like literally gone completely pale. Her eyes got the glazed look, and Nick and I were right there with her. And she was talking and she started slurring her words and she started to pass out.
Wow.
And Nick was right there, so we held her. And then she came back after about 10 seconds. And she was like, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? But I could see her color was still that very pale, the glassiness of the eyes, the unfocused pupils. And I said to Nick, hold on to her because she's not done yet. And she started to go down again. And as soon as she did, I literally grabbed an aconite and I like flicked it down her throat, literally quick, like popped it to her mouth. And it was like, boom, like her color came back, her eyes cleared, etc. And that wasn't an injury. She didn't injure herself. It was literally the actual shock, emotionally, psychically, if you will, of almost falling, was just that enough to just push that. And it was very much an absolute perfect, picture perfect shock outcome that she displayed. And the aconite literally, instantaneously, she didn't even need another one. She had the one. All she needed was the one. And she was absolutely fine afterwards.
Yeah, it's very good. God, something came in and out of my mind. Maybe it'll come back.
It's one of those days.
One of those days. Okay. So you've all got that. Aconite for shock. Bellus perennis, deep tissue injury. First, you give the arnica, assess the situation. Oh, yeah, I know what I wanted to say. If somebody is not conscious, you can put a little bit of remedy in water and you can put it on the pulse points. You know, if for instance, somebody is going to hospital and they say, nil by mouth, you can't have a drink, you can't, you know, because you're going to theatre or whatever. You can just dab it on the lips or put it on the pulse points. It'll work just as well. We're dealing with the frequency. So this frequency is coming in contact with your frequency. You don't need a pill. You just need to come in contact consciously or unconsciously with the energy. Okay. Hypericum nerves, anything to do with nerves, any injury to do with nerves, think hypericum. When we go a bit further, we can also look at it's one of the possible remedies for shingles, for instance, because that's has a big nerve connection. So anything to do with nerves, it's brilliant. I remember when we were in college, the head of the college told us about this. Her cat, she said one day she clocked her cat walking through the living room and its tail was going like that. And she went, oh. And she gave Hypericum 200 and nothing much happened. And she was surprised. And she rang this homeopathic vet and he said, oh, hi. He said he was a Scottish, I can't do Scottish accents, pardon me. But he said, give it a 10M. And she did. And she said the tail just went like that, straight up. It was amazing. So there are times when you need to go higher with the remedy. And in that case, you probably won't have it to hand. So you will need to make a water potency. And I don't think we talked about them the last time, did we? You're muted, Danny.
On computer, work with me. No, we have not gotten into water remedies.
We might do that the next day.
One, because that's an important one that we need to cover for sure. Yeah. But rest assured, you can program water to behave like a remedy that you need. And we will talk about that the next time. Yeah. So Hypericum for nerves, nerve injuries. Calendula for wounds, all kinds of wounds, but most particularly these lacerated wounds, wounds that don't have a very regular edge to them, wounds that are likely to go septic.
Grazed knees
Yeah, crazy.
that
Like I was
kind of a
saying,
wound
ooh,
that's just
mm,
it's rough and it's
mm,
nasty. Those kind of wounds are brilliant.
those kind of wounds. Yeah. Leadum, puncture wounds. Puncture wounds. We won't come, these are things you won't come across too often necessarily, but when you do, it's really good to have the right remedies. So you don't have to go, you don't have to have a tetanus jab. They don't work anyway, but you will be.
You don't want to hear Danny, everyone else here, all the unfuckers have heard my lecture on tetanus and all of that. You don't want to get me started on that.
No, no. So you can rest assured that you can use a homeopathic remedies and all should be well. Cantharis for burns. Think of it for sunburn, for scalds, when there's a lot of pain, a lot of rawness, a lot of burning raw pain. Spanish fly. Brilliant. And rutagrave for tendons. So that's all you need to focus on, just those words, and that will start you going. And now I think I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Well, then I will open the floor for questions. There's a few different ones. So right at the